The information contained in this video is strictly for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or other professional advice and is not a substitute for consultation with a qualified professional. The opinions expressed in the show do not necessarily reflect the views of the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development, Borough of Manhattan Community College, and the City University of New York. State of Mind is a web-based discussion program that explores the relevant social, economic, and political issues that are prominent at the post-secondary level of education. State of Mind is sponsored by the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. BMCC. Start here, go anywhere. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krishna C. Nadella, and this is State of Mind. Continuing on our Under Pressure series, today's topic is about ethics, honor codes, and social media. In the spring of 2012, 125 Harvard College students who were investigated for cheating on the take-home final examination of the spring 2012 edition of Government 1310, Introduction to Congress. More recently, an 8-month investigation at the University of North Carolina revealed that as many as 3,100 students over the better part of 2 decades took bogus classes and received unearned A's and unearned B's. Considering the tremendous investment one must undertake to attend and then successfully complete a college degree, it begs the question, why cheat? Back with us to help better understand the various perspectives on the topic are the following guests. Dr. Ria Almeida from the Institute for Family Services, Dr. Rogers Fay from the BMCC Counseling Center, and Dr. Brady from the Schreyer Honors College at the Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Almeida, Dr. Rogers Fay, Dr. Brady, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'd like to start off our conversation with you, Dr. Almeida. What is it about the human condition that allows a person to want to cheat? I know that's a very loaded statement.
I mean, I think cheating has gone on for as long as we've been human beings in different forms and places. I don't know whether cheating is more prevalent in college campuses. I do know that some of the research that's come out recently with online students, especially international students, there's sort of a connection, or there's an accusation that a lot of those students are doing things around plagiarism that's different than kids in the classroom. But I don't know for sure whether that's accurate or not. But you know, you read literature and people were cheating in all kinds of ways, whether it's
So Dean Brady, from an academic standpoint, I know that you guys set policy on the ethics committee that you sit on. Can you take a couple seconds or a minute or two to talk about what it is that you're seeing from an academic level and the observations that really seem to be timely and timeless?
It's certainly timeless. I mean, my field academically is ancient Hebrew and Jewish literature, and cheating, certainly in the biblical context, is all the way back in the beginning. And I think it comes from a basic sense of wanting to better oneself. I mean, we're looking out for ourselves. It's self-interest. It is there in the classroom. It usually comes not... Very rarely, in my experience, does it come from some sort of pathology, but it's usually a student who's at an extreme position. They feel that they don't have any other options left to them. The University Ethics Committee that I'm a part of is an overall committee at the university, and its goal is to look at everything that we do, from the job requirements for staff and administrators and faculty to our students, and talk about what are the ethical expectations we have for one another, and to help set that tone. Rather than a judicial board of which we have separate ones for the different constituencies within the university. But we want to set that tone right up at the top. Now, I won't dance around the obvious, which is Penn State University was in the news several years ago for a real breach of trust, where a retired football coach was accused and convicted of sexually molesting young boys. That is a reflection of the human condition when you have these many tens of thousands. But the university response has been to step forward and say, we need to make sure that we're creating a culture in which not only is that not tolerated or accepted, but also that those who see wrongdoing of any sort can feel comfortable coming forward and bringing to the fore any wrongdoing they see, whether that's plagiarism or cheating by faculty within their own research or students in the classroom environment. And that's something that I'm very interested to hear what the other panelists have to say about culture, because I think that is a huge factor in whether or not cheating at any level in any form is acceptable or not. Dr. Almeida, you referred to some of the international considerations. That's one of the things we wrestle with in the academy. Students who are coming from other cultures come in and they tell us, well, it's in our culture we don't cite the authority. It's considered an honor if we anonymously cite someone else's work. That's not our practice here.
Right.
And so how do we
Never heard
set
that
those
before.
barriers?
I see you nodding your head, Dr. Rogers-Fay, in terms of some of the commentary from Dr. Brady. Do you see in the BMCC Counseling Center students who are feeling the pressure, as we talked about in our previous episode, to find alternative ways to maybe get the desired goal that they are looking to achieve, and at least coming to you to talk about it?
Right. I think that it's going to come about in various ways, especially if after you sort of get in trouble, sort of they're kind of like, well, we recommend you go talk to somebody about it, and they may end up. But oftentimes it's, you know, there are a lot of international students where English is not their first language and may not know the correct way to cite a source that they wanted to use and didn't know that what they were doing was wrong. And so they sort of, you know, that if they're like first violations, like you have to sort of take it easy on them because also they're struggling and they don't know, and you have to sort of work with them.
Right. So it sounds like some forms of cheating are more about just ignorance and lack of understanding of cultural awareness. But I do have to ask the question, and it may be a brief yes or no. Is cheating innate? Is it something you just have that characteristic in you, for better or for worse, or is it something that's learned?
I kind of think it could go both ways. Yeah.
Are you Augustinian or not? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Right?
I mean, in some families, it depends on where you come from.
Right.
Cheating is sort of a skill that one has learned, and it isn't seen as it's not seen as unfavorable.
Right. In fact,
It's
it's
sort
probably
of
seen
a
as an advantage.
survival of the fittest,
fittest,
right? And it was sort of seen as if you could get by on such and such way, why wouldn't you take it in order to succeed? And if nobody was going to find out, I think social media, right, that we were sort of talking about now with a lot of taking pictures on your phone, and you can take pictures of exams, and a lot of people think they can get away with things. So, and then this interesting study I found while I was sort of researching on this was Professor Bauhaus was sort of looking at it, seeing that it was actually a personality psychopathy, that one is sort of like, it's sort of built in your personality that you just want to sort of get ahead, and you don't really see things as being, you know, that anything's wrong with it, which was an interesting take on it.
Well, there are a lot of students I've talked with who are now trying to sort of to justify their experience, saying, well, look, in the business world, as long as you're not explicitly violating this or that, we reward this creative behavior. And so I think there are these challenges where we have, the American culture in particular is one that glorifies success. And you don't have to go very far in just about any of our arenas, whether we're talking about sports or politics or business or academia, to find really clear examples of people who have cheated in order to achieve their success. And then the discussions that happen afterwards, like, well, but everybody else was juicing.
Right.
So does it make such a big deal? If, as long as everybody's doing steroids, then the batting records are all sort of equivalent for the era, right? Just stick an asterisk and we'll be done.
Right. The understanding that your baseline's already there, so you're just trying to be part of it. Dr. Brady, in terms of your work in the ethics committee at Penn State, when you're creating policy, where does rehabilitation fit in all of that? We can talk about the punishments, we can talk about enforcement, but what about actually getting someone to learn from that and move forward?
So you were saying earlier about if it's a first offense, with especially something like plagiarism, students often are a little unclear on it. Within the university at Penn State, it starts at the department with the faculty member who sees this, or a student turns someone in, and then it moves department into college and so forth. The goal there is to try and, as much as possible, have a teachable moment to really understand, is this pathological? Is this somebody who really is cheating, or is it somebody who simply misunderstood the assignment? We had an example, not unlike the Harvard one, except for the fact that our students weren't guilty, in that we had an entire class, honors class, of engineering students who the faculty member wrote them up as cheating. And it turns out what had happened was the faculty member had left up on the class website the answer sheet from a year before.
Are you serious?
And the students all thought that was basically a study guide.
Right.
And then he blamed the students for looking at what he had left up there. So then we had to talk it through with the faculty member too. one of the challenges of these kind of systems, though, is I ran into a case where we eventually uncovered that this young lady had actually been cheating, caught cheating 1 or 2 times almost every semester, but each time it had been dealt as the teachable moment, as the first offense in different units of the university. So we certainly want to try and have as much education, if not rehabilitation, education as possible in the process, making sure they're really understanding clearly what plagiarism is, so we do things when they come in as first-year students or transfer. Our international students in particular, we set standards because there are cultural differences there, and then try and hold firm to the standards that we've set as much as we're able.
So I'm starting to see a lot more on college campuses the concept of an academic honor code. Would you be able to take some time, just what is an honor code and how does it act as a deterrent to unethical behavior?
So we've had a lot of discussion and debate about this. I'm now in my 3rd year on serving on committees at Penn State that's trying to decide should we have a university-wide honor code and so on and so forth. In some contexts, like at UVA, University of Virginia, it's very specific. It is a code that, in the sense of a law, right? So a codification and so forth, and it's student run at UVA, for example. The students tell report on the students, and they go to a student board, and the students mete out the punishment. There, it's been around for over 100 years, I think, and it's a particular culture. Texas A&M is similar. Aggies neither lie nor cheat nor steal nor tolerate those who do. On the other hand, I should say I've been advocating for an approach that is more a statement of integrity. To have a statement borrowing from the Penn State alma mater, may no act of ours bring shame. And that this would be something that the entire university can rally around. And the difference between the 2 approaches is I'm suggesting we need to foster a culture and a community that simply says this is not who we are. You know, the Aggie Creed is getting to that, but it does it in a more legalistic way. We've got all the legalities we need. We have all the code we need. What we need, and this is not to suggest that we have rampant cheating at Penn State, but it's something that goes for the entire community that we can rally around. We can all recognize and say this is who we are. And I think about in athletics for years, Penn State had the phrase "success with honor."
That's correct.
And you know, it's not to suggest that there weren't ever some instances of players or coaches who might have tried to cut some corners to achieve success in the playing field, but the point was we held that up there. And that was a standard that we could then compare ourselves to. And I think that's what's important about these sorts of statements of honor and integrity or an honor code, is not that everybody is suddenly perfect, but we're trying to create a culture that says this is our ideal, and when people fall short, we have this, we can compare it to and say, no, we're not quite there, so what do we need to do, whether it's rehabilitation, education, or what have you.
So you talked about the peer group and the ability of the peer group to not only identify, any egregious behavior, but then to report it and then provide the actual penalty. What is it about society where we're put up against our peers as the enforcers, Dr. Rogers-Fay and Dr. Almeida, that makes us that much more attuned to it versus having an authorizing body per se? When you know it's your own colleague and classmate, that would be the one that'd be admonishing you.
Well, I just want to go back to part of what Dean Brady said about the honor code and the personal integrity. A lot of progressive schools are doing that now. They're actually having kids work things out on the playground, work things out in the classroom, doing a lot of the social justice sort of things where they want to really build the notion of personal integrity. And I think that idea of peer-to-peer is much more important because it creates that collective shared lived experience, where somebody from an authoritative position is not in the same lived experience in many ways, I think.
They want to make it more of like a group effort, sort of like watching out for your own group.
Yeah, better to have the pressure from your colleagues because those are the people that you spend all this time with versus maybe an authorizing body, which you see once every now and then, and they're somewhere in the distance, not necessarily feeling that.
And we may feel authority, but we desire the respect of our peers. And so again, it comes back to the culture. If the respect is earned by success, no matter how one achieves it, then you're going to seek that success in whatever means is possible. If, on the other hand, your peers respect you for having achieved success through hard work and honest means and so forth, then that's the path you're going to try and follow.
So, Doctor, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm just sort of remembering even all the research on bullying that we've done lots of work on. Standby connections are much more powerful in interrupting them than any program or anything specific that comes from the direction of clinicians or
Right.
school personnel.
Right. That is true, and that's something that we've actually seen in previous episodes about having your peers be there to say something, see something, say something, and that will act as much more powerful deterrent
Right.
than anything that you put in from an authorizing standpoint. Dean Brady, if you might take a second just to provide your own personal opinion, what could Harvard and UNC have done to avoid the egregious nature of the cheating that was on their campuses?
Well, in both cases, I think they're cultural. I mean, I hate to keep coming back to that, especially because culture is something that's so loosely defined and difficult to assess. In the case of UNC, I actually think the solutions were pretty simple. I was recently with a colleague from UNC who's aware of the details. It's a question of oversight. There were key individuals who should have known, and maybe they're not culpable in the sense that they didn't know, but then they're responsible in the fact that they should have known.
Right.
And so it's oversight. This is, in their case, there were often summer courses and so forth, and those are audited very carefully because they get paid by the credit and so on and so forth. So it's a part of the process in observation there. And there was also a culture that it's come out in the report very explicitly that athletics was very happy to use this hole that was created in the system. And so there were a lot of eyes turned away. In the Harvard case, there is such a pressure and an expectation, not simply of succeeding, but of straight A's. There was another report that came out recently. The average grade at Harvard is an A. And it's part of the nature.
Sign me up.
Well, it's interesting. So I went to Cornell University. I had dinner last night with one of my closest friends who also went to Cornell, and we were talking about this, and this goes back to our previous episode and discussion about depression and stress. Cornell, it's known as the easiest Ivy League to get into and the hardest to graduate from. And the result is that there's still this incredible pressure on the students there at Cornell as undergraduates because they're constantly striving and trying to outperform because they feel like they have to prove themselves.
Right.
And that's part of the culture that's come along with it. Whereas at Harvard, there's every effort to make sure that their students come out with the highest grades possible. There's another institution in that same city where you don't fail a course. If you failed a course, that course was never taken, and you retake it. Again, we're setting the wrong priorities. We're saying that success is a particular metric. It's a GPA as opposed to learning or being creative or meeting those goals. And we spent a lot of time in the Honors College and the Presidential Leadership Academy at Penn State talking about how do we create the right culture. Mostly we spend a lot of time because it's not easy. Secondly, because it's something that requires constant care and feeding. You can't just assume, okay, we're good and we can walk away and do something else. You constantly have to be paying attention to it. You've constantly got to be making sure that the people you're bringing in, whether it's faculty or coaches or administrators or students, are the quality and character of people that you want, so that on that level it becomes a perpetuating positive cycle.
Well, that's good fodder for my next question, Dr. Rogers-Fay. You work at a very unique perspective. You work in an academic institution, but you work in a counseling center within it. Taking some of the thoughts that Dean Brady had provided to us in terms of fostering that environment, what are the things that the BMCC Counseling Center implements and works to foster with their students, because they're not necessarily between the 18 to 22 age range?
Right, they vary, right? So, yeah, we're just really trying to offer a lot of different sources of support, and that they're throughout the campus, which many students aren't aware of all the things that we offer.
Right.
So I think it's a lot of educating, and they're also some of these people are the first in their family to ever have gotten this far,
Right.
and so there's a huge cultural component, which is it's really hard to define, and it's really then hard to understand where you're coming from, because some other schools you may come from a long line of academia,
Right.
and for them this is the first time they're actually stepping into a college campus, and unfortunately it's sad sometimes that they don't know that the stigma of I would never come to the counseling center to ask anybody for help,
Right.
let alone tell you that I did this bad thing.
Right.
So I think it's really hard for them.
So I'd like to throw a curveball into all of this. Social media. It's 2014. We have a generation we entitled the millennials who have grown up on the internet. Information is so readily accessible. It's almost a God-given right that I should be able to get information at my fingertips. How has this changed the paradigm of education, and more importantly, just society as a whole, to be able to utilize information, however it's achieved, to get ahead? And I'll start with you, Dr. Almeida.
Well, I mean, I think that, there's always the pros and cons in having parents help their kids sort of safely use the internet, but the research does show that technologically inspired pedagogy actually is as successful, if not more, in terms of student outcomes, learning outcomes, than traditional teaching methods. So there's something about that that dynamic interchange, and like you say, what people have grown up being accustomed to. That seems to work well.
Sure. Dean Brady, is that something that's been helpful for the students at Penn State?
I'd actually like to suggest there's a different issue at play. I mean, there is the informational question. So in terms of plagiarism, that becomes a question. There's actually a learning issue that's even more fundamental, which is Wikipedia is not authoritative or should not be always considered authoritative.
Thank you for stating that on the record.
It's actually a different aspect of this internet culture and generation that I think gets at the ethical concerns, which is things like music sharing and BitTorrent. Students, lots of surveys of our students have shown that they just don't see it as wrong to download music, movies, and content without paying for it.
Sure.
They just don't see that as wrong. And I mean, some of the best people I know and students, I've sat there with them, arguing with them in class. I mean, I try and do it in a Socratic method, but saying, basically saying, how can you think this isn't right? Right, or that it is right. I mean, because you haven't paid for this. Somebody had created this, and so on and so forth. It's the ease of access. None of them would walk into say Sam Goody, but it doesn't exist anymore. Thanks to the internet. But none of them would go across the street to JNR and pull a CD off the rack, stick it in their pocket, and walk away. They know that, or DVD, whatever. They would know that that's not right. Most of them have actually very little qualm doing that off the internet. That, I think, is where our new technology has shifted us in terms of our moral ground. I don't think that now justifies it.
Right.
I don't think the fact that it's easier and that people are no longer thinking of it as stealing means that it's not stealing. I think it still is. There are a bunch of other economic factors at play as to whether, music industry and movie industry and everything else. But that is the area actually where I think we're seeing in the classroom the ramifications of that access to the content and not seeing that as unethical. That's where those ramifications come in.
Right. So it sounds like almost depends on what you constitute cheating. If the student doesn't see it as cheating, then it isn't in their minds. Whether or not factually we can all sit here and logically state that that's wrong. And if that goes back to kind of what I wanted to ask you at the counseling center, when you talk to students, there has to be a self-awareness, first of all, to be able to understand that what I did was wrong, because if they see certain things as completely fine, that can have a gateway effect to how they perform in the classroom. Would you not say, Dr.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also, how's treatment going to work? If what you thought you saw or what you did was fine, and here I am saying, well, are you sure? Really? But why did they bring you in? Why did you think, or why did you have the disciplinary hearing? Or, right? But then it's not a two-way street at this point, and they're not really going to get anything out of coming.
Absolutely. Is the technology itself, so not the actual availability of the information, but the method in which it's delivered, such as cell phones, such as smartphones and the like, is that becoming a problem on the campuses, Dr. Brady? I know we talked about from pre-K to 12 how schools will actually tell students to leave them at the door, don't even bring them in. You can't really do that for 18 to 22-year-olds.
No, and I think in terms of actual cheating, students will get very creative. Even before the ubiquity of cell phones, I remember proctoring an exam for a friend of mine, and they had a textbook that was all these readings of New Testament early Christianity, and one student kept flipping to the back of the book. Well, I knew there were no readings in the back of the book. This student had worked very hard to type up notes, make them the same font and font size, and then pasted them into the back of the book and had all the answers there. Which the reality is he worked so hard if he just pulled them out, he would have had the study. So those things will always be there. I don't think it's particular to the media or the tool that's there. I do actually have cell phones and computers and things left at the front of the room when I'm giving exams. There's more, I think, a question of distracted learning. There's a whole other discussion on pedagogy. Do we allow a Twitter back channel when you're having a class? Do we allow them to? I often have my iPad open when I'm teaching a class, and I'll look something up while a student's responding to me and say, well, in fact, I just found it here, and let me read it to you. And So I try and engage as much as I can there. To me, the question is, a student who's just taken Social 119 is going to come away saying, well, I was just told that all morals are relative. So, I mean, you say it's cheating, but I don't, therefore it's not, because I decide it's not cheating.
Right.
And therein is your postmodern analysis.
Right, so we're engaged in this process, and I think what we have to do, and this is part of what is taking place at Penn State and other places, establishing these codes, is to say no. We have some fundamental moral ground that we're going to stand on. And while our tools and techniques may come and go, we're still going to remain firm. Your work is your work, somebody else's work is somebody else's work, and it needs to be acknowledged as such. Your property is your property, somebody else's property is somebody else's property, and you need to respect it. So body, personhood, and so forth. And I think that's where we need to remain. And I think that's actually a really, really important part of educating our men and women. We talked in the previous episode about the fact that this is their brain is a bowl of oatmeal. At this age, they're still forming thoughts. They're still forming social mores. Sure. And so that's why I think it's even more important not just say, well, just be free and experiment, but say, okay, but you're going to do it within this framework.
Right.
And we're going to try and enforce certain social mores, because as a society, we do say these things are important. We do say it's important to have consent before engaging in a sexual relationship. We do say it's important to recognize another person's work. And so for the very fact that they're still in formation, they're still developing and growing, is all the more reason for us to make the lines very, very clear.
Right. In fact, if anything, it sounds like the academic environment is that much more important as being that one last standing ground to make sure that students don't enter the real world until they get these social norms and moral grounds established well into their being before they actually go into the real world, because the mistakes and the cost of those mistakes out there are tenfold, and we've seen that with the 2008 financial crisis. So I'll definitely agree to that. As a parting thought, what can we learn from cases like UNC and Harvard? You had provided your thoughts as to what what happened, but where do we go from here? Schools like Harvard, they're going to be around for a long time. They're not going to go away from this. UNC is a very established school as well. But what's the general theme in the academic world as to where do you take away from this?
I won't speak for all the academic world. I won't even pretend to speak for all of Penn State. But when things happened there were some folks who said to me, as an adopted Penn Stater, well, so much for being a place of integrity. And I said, you misunderstand what the term integrity means. Integrity doesn't mean that we're perfect. It means that when something wrong has happened, we acknowledge it, we recognize it, and we seek to remedy it.
Rectify.
I think that's where we move forward, no matter which institution it is that we're talking about. Not to try and justify it, but to say, no, this was wrong,
right.
And we're sorry, and here are the things we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. But when it inevitably does happen again, we will continue to respond appropriately.
I think that's a good point, Dr. Maida. I think we could say that for life in general, is that we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make horrible mistakes. We're going to fall flat on our face. The real key is, are you going to get up and learn from them more than anything else? And I think that's something we see not just at the academic level, but even within families and within society as well.
Society as well, yes, absolutely.
And just as a final thought, I think one thing I think I should mention as well is that, look, from what we see and when we talk about cheating, I don't want the general audience that watches the show to think that that's what happens at schools everywhere. By no means is that the case. But we do need to acknowledge the fact that this is a very intense time in one's life, especially for the 4-year traditional education. 18 to 22, their brains are mush, as you said.
It's the human condition.
The human condition. And so to that extent, there's still a lot of positive going on. But to the extent that we want to provide even more the more positive environment, positive nurturing, it's good to talk about these topics. So on that note, Dr. Almeida, Dr. Rogers-Fay, Dr. Brady, thank you so much again for joining us and providing your unique perspectives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll wrap up our show for today. I'd like to once again thank our guests for joining us. If you like what you saw in today's episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback for myself, feel free to reach out to me via email or Twitter. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And remember, every life is a book. Make yours a bestseller. Have a good night.